Our guest leads an organization founded in 1881 by visionary Clara Barton. Today it's America's premier emergency response organization. It's also the place that trades a cookie and a glass of juice for when we donate part of our blood. Gail J. McGovern, President and CEO of the American Red Cross, is this week's leader on leadership.
Knowing when to ask for help is critical when you're in a leadership position.
It's getting the best out of people. That's the essence of leadership.
Major funding for Leaders on Leadership is provided by Greenleaf Trust.
Helping people manage their wealth, accumulate assets, and preserve those assets for generational continuity implies trust. We are sitting down on the same side of the desk as you are. We're planning for your financial needs.
Additional funding provided by the Wayne State University School of Business Administration.
Welcome to Leaders on Leadership, here with a student audience on campus at the Wayne State University and Detroit Public Television Midtown Detroit studio. I'm Larry Fobes. When she was in the 4th grade, Gail McGovern wrote a paper about Clara Barton, the founder of the American Red Cross. Today, Gail has Clara's job, but it wasn't a direct career path. Thanks for being here, Gail.
It's my pleasure, Larry. Thank you.
Your career's taken a lot of interesting turns, starting right back in college. Your first years at Boston University, then off to Johns Hopkins, but a completely different academic environment. What was the difference?
So I went to Boston University. I was 18 years old, so I wasn't making decisions the way an adult would make decisions. So I went to Boston University because I wanted a room with my best friend. I went to a tiny little high school, and now I'm at this big city school with about 30,000 undergrads. I had 1,000 students in my calculus class, 1,500 in my Psych 101 class. I was lost. I really was lost. And to make matters more interesting, my high school boyfriend had gone to Johns Hopkins. So he convinced me that I should transfer to Hopkins, and it was an all-male school at the time. So I said, no, 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 I really don't want to do that. And unbeknownst to me, he threw in an application for me. Hopkins did this very cool thing. You did not have to officially apply. You could just fill out all your stats, and then they'd send you an application if they thought you could go. So the real application comes in the mail, and I called him up and I said, I told you I didn't want to go. And he said, you're in, just fill it out. And the next thing I know, I'm in an environment with 1,900 men and 30 women.
You said later on that that whole experience helped you in your career later on because you learned how to adapt to different environments where you're doing business. Where's the line between adapting to the environment so you're efficient and effective and selling out?
Oh, that's a great question. So first of all, as a footnote, my boyfriend dumped me after 1 week. So not only was I in this new environment, but I was trying to figure out why I packed up my suitcase and went there. But I always had friends that were male in high school. I always had male-oriented pursuits. You know, I played the drums. I didn't play the piano. I love mathematics. So I felt very much in my element there, and it wasn't a pretentious existence. I didn't try to mold myself to be in the environment. The environment really molded me. And you know, when I got into corporate America, I heard again and again people said, isn't it weird being in a room with all guys? And the answer was, I just spent 3 years of my life with all guys. So it was kind of an adaptation by fire, I guess.
As you said, your undergraduate program was in quantitative mathematics?
Quantitative sciences, yes.
You were the geek.
I really was the geek before geek was in.
So you started your career at AT&T as a computer programmer, then went to the dark side in sales and marketing and MBA at Columbia. Was that all part of an expanding career interest, or is it just changes because there was a job opportunity or a...
Larry, to be honest with you, when I started at AT&T, this time I was following my next boyfriend, and I just wanted to target Philadelphia, and I loved programming. I absolutely loved programming. It was like getting paid to solve a puzzle, and I felt like I couldn't get enough of it. And I actually rose pretty quickly in the organization, and before I knew it, I was supervising large groups of programmers, and I started getting bored. They're just, you know, I sort of had my fill of it. I wanted to go back and code. I couldn't because now I'm a supervisor. And I realized that I was going to spend the rest of my life doing this unless I threw my hat in the ring for something else. So when you said I went to the dark side, I went to sales and marketing. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Because for the first time ever, I was able to understand what is it that AT&T is manufacturing, selling, and we had fantastic products and services. So I always looked at my job as giving people the gift of understanding how their businesses could get better. So I never really felt like I was pushing product. I always felt like I was informing people.
And the career obviously worked well. Over 22 years at AT&T, became executive vice president for the consumer markets, a little $26 billion division of residential long distance. Then you went to Fidelity.
Yes.
And became head of the unit that does individual investments.
Yes.
Now, if my telephone service doesn't work too well, I'm irritated. But if my portfolio goes south because of malfeasance, I'm really in trouble. Does the mission of the organization change the way leaders lead?
So that is also a really good question. So I always tried to figure out the higher purpose that I was bringing to the table when I was in business. So when people's phone service went out, if you had an 800 center and all of your products and services were being sold through that toll-free center, you cared very deeply if your phone service went out. And I always looked at it as our mission being we connected people to their loved ones, we connected people to the information that they needed, and so I took it very seriously. And at Fidelity Investments, the interesting thing about the typical individual investor is they're very self-directed. They're picking their own securities. And so when it tanks, they blame themselves. And when the market moves a lot, there's a lot of money in motion. People that have an advisor suddenly say, hey, I could have done this better by myself. And people that were doing it by themselves, they touched that stove and burned their hand, and now they're saying, I need an advisor. So, but at Fidelity, we would help, but for the most part, people made their own decisions.
Then you made another change into a new sector and went to Harvard, Harvard Business School, and joined faculty. There's an old saw out there that those that can do and those that can't teach. You clearly can do. Why teach?
So at the time, the newspapers were littered with all of these companies that had committed some form of corporate malfeasance. I mean, you were reading about Enron, you were reading about WorldCom, and I started thinking that it would be such a privilege to try to talk to leaders, young potential leaders, and maybe have an impact on the way they led organizations, the way they looked at the world. And so I very much wanted to touch the classroom environment and have an opportunity to mold young minds. But I have to say, your typical Harvard Business School student was so smart that I think I learned as much as they did in the classroom. It's a little humbling to know that you're holding the chalk and that you probably have the lowest IQ in the room.
I've known other corporate senior leaders who've gone to work in various capacities for universities around the country, and they always report that they have a slightly different philosophical viewpoint than the career academics. Yes. How'd you fit in?
So I loved sort of straddling both worlds. I embraced this professorship with all my heart. I did a lot of writing. I did published a bunch of articles. They were in management journals, not in arcane refereed journals. And I loved that part of it. So I worked with young faculty, I worked with senior faculty, and I really embraced this role as a practitioner, but also as an academic.
Can you teach practical real-world things in a classroom situation? How do you do that?
So what I would do at the end of each class, I would steal the last 5 minutes, and I would just say, okay, now I'm going to wrap this case. And I would always say the same thing. I would say, someday you're going to be sitting in a conference room, and you're going to have to make the following decision. And I would explain how, in a real-world environment, what they just learned for the last 90 minutes really could occur. And I tried to ground it so that my voice would be in their head when they actually went to that conference room, and they were able to pull up the experience from the classroom.
Now, I'm assuming that while your tenure at Harvard, that there were people who called asking if you'd like to come back into the real world.
They did. They did.
But then you went, when American Red Cross called, you took it. Before we talk about your leadership at American Red Cross, tell us about the organization. How did it get formed? What's it do? How's it get funded?
It's the most remarkable organization. And frankly, before I joined the American Red Cross, I didn't even know the depth and breadth of all that we do. First of all, as you said, we do collect blood. In fact, we provide 40% of the nation's blood supply, believe it or not. So, you know, we ship 10 million units, and each one of those units came from somebody who opened up their veins to do a good deed. And I've met the most remarkable blood donors. I met a man whose son was waiting for a kidney transplant, and this was his way of giving back. I met a kid who had 36 blood transfusions and almost died in a car accident. Now he's running Ironman competitions. It's really extraordinary. I met a man who was in his late 60s who was in the process of donating his 49th gallon of blood. So blood services is something that's very important in our mission. Now, most people know that we respond to disasters. They see us on the TV when they're big ones, but what most people don't know is we respond to 70,000 disasters a year. And they can be from a single family house fire to, you know, Hurricane Katrina. It's amazing. And these are volunteers. They get paged in the middle of the night. They follow the fire department to wherever the disaster might have struck. And they make sure that the family has comfort, a place to sleep, clothes, hope. It's amazing. And then the last thing that we do, which most people don't know about, is we do a lot for the men and women in the armed forces. We do a lot of emergency connections. We'll bring the soldier home if there's a death in the family. It's a great part of our mission.
I read this place, there were like 170 people considered for this position. What sealed the deal between you and American Red Cross?
So, boy, that would be a great question to ask my board, but I can tell you what the interview was like. First of all, the phone did ring, and I thought, I don't want to go back into corporate America. I want to do something, you know, I've been there, done that, 28 years worth. And I suddenly found myself mobile because my daughter had finished high school. She was off to college. So when the phone rang and I got that call, I thought, I feel like I was born to try to do this job. And I talked to a lot of people, and I investigated what the challenges were. And when I went in and talked to the board, I just spoke from the heart about what a national treasure the American Red Cross is. How much upside opportunity there is, and how it just needed a little bit of leadership to right the ship, because the people are so bright and so dedicated. And I didn't want to move my husband if there wasn't a big challenge, so that drew me to it as well. And I think maybe what sealed the deal is I said, look, I'm a soft-hearted person. I'm not going to go in there and start laying people off. I'm going to work with the team that's there. You know, I'm a humanitarian, which is why I want this job. So maybe that's what it was.
Thanks for being here, Gail. We're going to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll talk with Gail McGovern, President and CEO of American Red Cross, about leadership in that organization. You okay? Welcome back to Leaders on Leadership. Joining us today is Gail McGovern, President and CEO of the American Red Cross, and we're talking about leadership at the 130-year-old organization. Gail, when you came into the job, most of your predecessors had been Washington-based. Elizabeth Dole, after a turn as Secretary of Transportation, your immediate predecessor was from the IRS, senior executive. Coming in as an outsider, was that a hindrance or a help?
You know, I went to school in Baltimore at Johns Hopkins, and back then there wasn't much going on in Baltimore. The harbor wasn't built up, and I would drive to Washington, D.C. almost every single weekend. And I love the city. And you drive around, and no matter how cold-hearted you are, your sense of patriotism just goes to the roof. It's a beautiful place. And even though the discourse is getting very loud and very angry, I have to tell you, the people that I have met that are public servants are doing whatever they can to try to do the best they can to serve our country. So I've loved it, and I never felt like an outsider. I always felt embraced in D.C.
Now, you came in, the American Red Cross is this revered organization out there with a tradition goes back 130 years, but it had fallen on some tough times. Some things weren't going quite right. You were like the 7th CEO in 7 years. How do you come in as the new leader, the outsider, do the changes necessary to right the ship, create stability, and just keep things moving, and create confidence that there's going to be a future?
Well, the first thing that became very evident to me is that this could not be done by one person alone. And I met with a lot of people out in the field, a lot of our chapter execs, and I saw they were really smart people. And so I made up my mind that any initiatives that we took, we were going to bring people in from the field and ask their opinions. And once they had skin in the game, they all knew what needed to be done. And the beautiful thing about a Red Crosser is if you explain to them how your actions are going to forward our mission and also make us better stewards of our donors' dollars, they're in. They are in. Our chapter network right now is 10% smaller than it was just a year ago. And because we saw there was waste, we saw there were ways to consolidate, we brought 50 of our chapter execs in and handed them the magic marker and said, help us figure out how we can be better stewards of our donors' dollars.
So by being stewards of the dollars, better stewards, is that how, because I read you came in, there was a couple of $100 million budget and the board gave you a couple of years to fix it up. So by being better stewards is how you fix that, as opposed to just slashing costs across the board or something?
That's a great question too. I've been around when people do the cheese slice and they just tell everybody cut your budget 10%, and you cut the good, the bad, you cut things that are mission critical. We looked at back office operations that could be consolidated with having no impact on our mission, and that's where we went. And you know, as we were consolidating, we got clobbered with storms, tornadoes, hurricanes, wildfires, earthquakes, and we responded to the mission each and every time. So that basically brought it home to me that we had done it right. And like I said, the leadership goes so far beyond me and my immediate team. There are great leaders all around our country that are part of the Red Cross, and they helped us figure it out.
Part of your job is to lead the charge when there's a natural disaster someplace in the world. And there had been some public comment that things didn't go quite right after Katrina and after 9/11. Your first test was the earthquake in Haiti, and that got good reviews. Think the team's back. When you're leading that project, there's not much information. It changes constantly. 2/3 of it's suspect. How do you make the decisions in that kind of condition on what to do with the little time you've got?
So, another great question. First of all, we are really proud of the fact that 91 cents of every dollar that people donate to us goes to the people that we're serving. So with that as our mantra, we also decided in Haiti we were going to be completely transparent. So if the press asked us questions about what we were doing there, we showed them everything. I mean, we showed them how many water bottles, how many relief items we gave out. I mean, to the point where I think we were sort of stultifyingly boring and they stopped asking questions. But it was a total open environment where we were transparent not only with the press but also with their donors. And there are false starts. I mean, Haiti is a difficult country, and we had to very quickly respond when there was a false start. We have a lot of people on the ground. They're monitoring where the money goes to make sure that we're spending it wisely. And we're trying to make order out of chaos there. And I feel like we're doing very good work.
We've talked a lot. You've made a lot of changes there as the new leader, which was your charge. I'm assuming the American Red Cross is a relatively traditional organization, like most large older institutions. How do you lead the charge so that, I mean, do the tough times that we're facing today, the tough economy, does that somehow help increase the idea that change is necessary?
So the economy does provide another reason to be more efficient, but even in good times, we need to make sure that our donors' hard-earned dollars are being used correctly. They really care about this. I have to tell you a story. One of our donations for Haiti was a 4th grade class. They gave us $400 that they raised during a bake sale, and they asked if I would come to the school and visit them. So I said, you know, I can't really travel there, but I'll answer your questions on a Skype hookup. So I figured these kids were going to ask me questions about where is Haiti. These kids were tough. I mean, they were as tough as the toughest reporter I ever faced. Where's my money? How's it being spent? How do we know the money went there? I mean, it's a beautiful thing. It really is that our young philanthropists care deeply about making sure that A, they're giving back and that it's being used right. And I have emblazoned in my head the picture of that little 4th grade class with all those 8-year-olds sitting in a horseshoe. And when I make decisions, I want to make sure that if they were in the room with me, that they would be proud of me.
And when you do something that doesn't turn out right, when you make the inevitable mistake that people seem to believe that CEOs are like movie characters and never make mistakes, how do you deal with that? Do you dwell on that because you're mad that something went wrong, or you just kind of move on?
I often give talks on leadership, and 2 of the 5 things that I tell young people about being a good leader is good leaders, when they get more information and they see they're heading in a bad direction, they course correct very quickly. We had in our heads some of the ways that we wanted to consolidate, for example. Our chapter leadership came in, they pointed out frailties with it. We went a completely different direction. I see more companies fail because their leadership just won't change their mind, even in the face of a bad decision. And the other thing that I tell young people all the time is great leaders are resilient. You are going to make mistakes. I mean, everyone does, but it's how quickly you shake it off, how quickly you course correct, and anyone can lead when times are great. Great leaders are those that can lead through complicated and difficult times. And when those times hit, there are going to be bumps in the road, but you've got to shake it off, or else, you know, it rubs off on the organization.
One last question, Gail. The one sector you haven't been in yet is government. Let's hypothetically put you in a new job in government where you're going to be advisor to senior leaders in all the branches about how to work through this divisiveness, this polarization that seems to be stopping the government. What's the one big leadership insight you're going to share with these folks?
So I suppose the insight I would say is compromise. It's not going to get done without compromise. And if each side hasn't given a little bit, we're still going to be stuck in these polarized camps. And what I see is a group of people who work so hard and are so smart. And I think that what we need is kind of those smoke-filled rooms from the LBJ days where people just work together and hammer out a solution. And one thing that I have seen at the American Red Cross is that the American public is unbelievably generous and that our public leaders are unbelievably dedicated. And I have great optimism that they are going to figure it out.
Thanks for being here, Gail.
Thank you, Larry.
Please join us again next time for another edition of Leaders on Leadership. See you then.
Major funding for Leaders on Leadership is provided by Greenleaf Trust.
Helping people manage their wealth, accumulate assets, and preserve those assets for generational continuity implies trust. We are sitting down on the same side of the desk as you are. We're planning for your financial needs.
Additional funding provided by the Wayne State University School of Business Administration. An encore presentation of Leaders on Leadership is available online for viewing at dptv.org.